Welcome back to the Lead and Allure Founder podcast. Today we are joined by Stanley Foodman, the CEO of Foodman CPAs and Advisors. Stanley operates at the intersection of finance, law, and criminal forensics. A veteran advisor and an expert witness with a background in law enforcement, he has spent decades inside the hidden machinery of international tax compliance, anti-money laundering, and white-collar investigations. Today we'll be discussing why global compliance relies on fear, the reality of multi-billion-dollar bank audits, and what happens when the state decides to make an example out of a business. Welcome, Stanley. It's great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, George. Appreciate you inviting me.
Absolutely. I appreciate you jumping on. So could we just start with a kind of overview of your journey, how you came to founding Foodman, and maybe some of the good times, bad times, an overview first.
There are no bad times, George.
Only good, huh?
There are times that are not as fun, but they're, it's way with
no light without dark.
Yeah, it's actually less fun when you're working for somebody than when you're running your own business, even though it has a different set of aggravations. Anyway, I started my journey, as you called it, with what is now called KPMG. It was called Pete Marwick Mitchell and Company out of university, and moved on from there to I was asked to take on a job for a public company that was a utility company, and they had some issues, and that's when I ran into my first forensic stuff, as we say. To assist them. I was asked to assist them with litigation that they were actually involved with one of their contractors that was building a power plant and had been building a power plant, and then another power plant construction project. And that's when I ran into my first case of my first instance of seeing bribery and corruption at that level pay off to get business and so on.
So were you working in a legal role back then and advising?
No, purely what we'll call an auditing role. We didn't have the term forensic accounting the same way we have now. It became popular later, but that was my first experience. And interestingly enough, in one case, one of the prime contractors was another public company, and it was regarding the building of a nuclear power. And the other contractor was another group of people. For those of you that might be familiar with the TV show in the United States, The Sopranos, they were out of that section of New Jersey. And it was really, I was dealing with the American mafia trying to get things that we needed them done. And that was fun. And I did not involve myself with them like they wanted me to, so they could then control my life. I always managed to stay away from those people in terms of paying me for anything or doing any business with them.
That's incredible. So did you meet those people face to face and they were trying to get you to kind of come under their wing and you stood kind of strong?
I was sitting and I remember for the Sinostra people, I was in a boardroom, conference room, just me and them. And we were discussing what was going on this construction site. And I have developed over the years a very strong familiarity with construction. And so I was explaining why they were going to have to pay for certain things that they thought that we were going to pay for, but we were going to pay for because it was their negligence. And they were asking me if I could be a little softer because it would be better for my career. And I said no, because my reputation and my name was everything to me. And they ended up bending, which was good.
It's not like what you see in the movies, is it? They seem to never bend, but maybe they're softer in real life.
No, actually, they bend a lot, has been my experience, because that wasn't the only experience with them. The second big experience was when I was now in private practice for myself, and I had acquired a client through the acquisition of someone else's practice, and that client was in the midst of a litigation in another part of the state of Florida where I live, and so I was asked to help them with that litigation. Once again, there was no term of art forensic accounting being used. Some lawyers were using accountants for different terminology for the word accountant.
Yeah.
But I thought forensic accounting was a nice term of art, so I started using it myself. This is around 1980.
Okay.
So it's been a long time. And they called us investigative accountants in those days. So we drove up in a car to one of the larger cities in the state, up near the Georgia border, where this litigation was occurring in federal court. Once again, they tried to corrupt me. They did not succeed. And my client won the case because we were able to show certain things from the record, the financial record. It spoke for itself effectively. I don't make I don't form opinions as to legal matters. I let the numbers speak for themselves, and the narration always follows the numbers and the documents.
Mm. So just to get it clear, like were you working with companies that basically had to delegate with, other parties, some of which, were kind of mafia and other people who had a lot of power and control over certain areas? You were always working in private companies?
No, I mean, I had my own practice. So yes, in the sense that we're engaged by private companies or their law firms. It depends on the situation. Sometimes
Okay.
it's the law firm. Sometimes it's the private company. But I would say for the most part, my pure forensic investigations with regards to litigation are always through or alongside a law firm. There's no other way to do it because I can't demand documents. I'm not able to subpoena documents. I'm not an attorney. And so the lawyers do that work. What I do is with the lawyers is I recommend what we need in order to get our job done. And they go out and they ask for those documents. And once we review them, then we know what we want to do next. And then we go into further procedures.
Absolutely, yeah. So first question I want to ask you is, how do regulatory bodies weaponize fear psychology and, as they say, FATCA, FATCA enforcement to force compliance when they lack the resources to audit every institution?
Well, I'm going to talk about the United States side because that's what I'm most familiar with. In the United States, we have what we call third-party reporting. We're set up to do a lot of voluntary reporting. Okay, tax return in the United States. Everybody's required to file one.
Yeah.
But we provide the information. We have it done on our side that the public does. And so how does the government, for example, audit a tax return? Well, part of what we do, since we have this voluntary system of providing information to the government, they've deputized third parties to provide them with parallel information. And that parallel information, then it permits them to determine whether what's on a tax return for certain things is actually accurate. Now, the other side is, as a result of, in their case, as a result of years of audits and examinations, which are always, by the way, in very small numbers compared to the numbers of returns filed. There's well over 100 million returns filed in the United States every year, and they probably audit right now less than 1%.
Okay, so
Although with artificial intelligence, that number is going to go up dramatically. That's my prediction. So that's one way to think. So what happens is people become scared into compliance.
Yeah.
We have a famous case of Al Capone, the famous Chicago mafia leader who they couldn't convict him of certain things, but they convicted him of tax evasion. The only thing they were able to actually convict him of at the time. And so that's how the IRS developed its reputation off of that one case. But they've lived up to it. They win about 93% of their cases in court for tax, and they win most of their, I would say, 90 some odd percent of their cases also in federal tax court, which is a civil side, not the criminal side. So we use third-party reporting, and that doesn't only apply to tax. We also use various sections of the U.S. Code of Federal Regulations in the United States to form a convergence between various reporting agencies and law enforcement agencies. So just staying with tax for a moment, we have something called FATCA, which is very unpopular in the rest of the world. But since then, Europe came up with CRS, which we helped create. But by the way, we're not a signatory to. But because we have FATCA, and that's what we're interested in, but we helped Europe create CRS, the Common Reporting Standard. So which is actually, I like to call it FATCA on steroids because of how it works. It's it's different. But in any event, the FATCA forms are anti-money laundering forms in disguise, because one of the main investigators of money laundering is the IRS. So they have two FATCA forms, one for the non-U.S. banks to report on about U.S. account holders, and then what the U.S. account holders report on from their side, and then they look at them and they say, well, they're not the same. And if they're not the same, we're going to make an example out of this person. So there's two ways they're going to make an example. They're either going to take money or they're going to charge a crime, or both. So those are the methodologies, and that's true in a lot of areas. I mean, our reporting system is very extensive. When we're talking about securities. Companies that are registered with the SEC have to file reports with the SEC. Well, those reports have to be based on, in our country, generally accepted accounting principles to begin with. There's another system very similar, but generally accepted accounting principles is based on historic cost accounting only, whereas the European system, IFRS, uses market value approach and to record, for example, the values of assets and things over time. We are starting to approach some of that in the reporting. So what does that do? Well, it lets the banks know that, in the case of correspondent banking, for example, that U.S. taxpayers are going to be reporting, hopefully, on what they're doing overseas, because we're taxed on our worldwide income. And we have many other laws dealing with corruption and so on, which we call a long arm. So it gives the U.S. government authority from the U.S. government to go and seek further information overseas. And so we have all of this reporting structure. It's kind of like a spider web. It's a velvet glove approach. And it really says that either you report accurately, and that first of all, you have to report, but if you're going to, and then you have to report accurately. It's not or, it's and. And if you don't, if a reporting entity does not report accurately, it can lead to consequences which are very unpleasant. And then we make examples out of people.
Yeah.
And that gets into the press, and that's how it's enforced. So, and of course, there's the fear of fines, which we can talk about also.
So yeah, would you say that like making an example out of firms is, and of course that goes to the public as well, right? So like you said, it goes out to the press. Do you think that basically instills fear in people so that they're kind of forced into compliance? Is that like the main leverage you have on increased compliance?
After all these years, I have a saying, and I'll just use U.S. taxpayers because it's the simplest example. When they get a notice from the IRS, a lot of them go temporarily blind. They can't read it. They're afraid of it. They're terrified. The U.S. tax-paying public is terrified of the Internal Revenue Service over here, just like I'm sure there's a certain sense of discomfort with inland revenue in Great Britain.
With the HMRC.
Or the Hacienda in Spain. Or the fisc in France. I mean, we know that locally, a lot of folks who come here from France and take up residency don't want to register in the local consul or even in the French embassy that they're here because they're afraid of the French fisc. They also are pretty severe on people that don't comply, non-compliant. So,
what are your thoughts on, I guess, just to go very high level, what are your thoughts on taxes? And of course, like there's countries that are kind of on the come up now, maybe kind of the modern equivalent of like Switzerland, like Dubai, where they don't charge tax. What do you think? Like, what is your personal sentiment on those kind of countries? And what do you think is better for the overall economy? Because, of course, the benefit of that is that they're pulling a lot of business people and wealthy people out to the country, which is then good for the economy. But what's your sentiment on that?
I think that I don't live in a fiscal paradise, a tax paradise, tax haven. But I don't have anything negative to say about countries that don't charge an income tax. I really don't. I would love to not pay income tax. So there's a social contract involved in all of this in every jurisdiction of the world. They say that I've heard said that certain people in Scandinavian countries have the happiest populations in the world. Why? Well, they pay really large amounts of taxes as a percentage of their income. But the government tends to have a social contract that says, and they keep it, if you will give us all this money, we will give you all of these things in return.
Exactly.
So it's a trade. It's a trade. So, and that social contract, implicit in that is the need to have a population which is not restive, and in other words, it's not unhappy. It's not going to go out and complain every day on the streets. Okay, and so on. It's when the things that we see here, a lot of the things that we see have to do with what people perceive as a change in the social contract between the government and the people living here. You're running into, I've seen news reports where Britain is running into it with certain groups of people, and the same thing in Europe. It's mainland Europe.
Yeah.
And different countries are treating it differently, and we're treating it differently from what they're doing. But certainly I don't have anything negative to say about countries that don't charge taxes.
I just find it so interesting that, of course, like there's the social contract for European countries and others, but then, UAE will still deliver even maybe, I mean, yeah, definitely more than, let's say, the British government is delivering, way more.
Yeah, but that
And
is
like,
their social contract. They've got all of these other things. They've got petroleum, and they have a very small number of people in control. And
yeah,
yes, they have, very, very successful entrepreneurs and so on. But they've said, we're going to use the proceeds from all this wealth
yeah,
and natural resources. We're going to give you schooling. We're going to give you medical care. We're going to make sure you have decent housing. Just don't rise up against us.
mm, mm.
And oh, by the way, if you do, then we won't be so pleasant. But that's a different
That's
issue.
true. That's true. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So that's
Because they
just a
are
different social contract.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What I was going to ask quickly about, actually, I have two questions that I've just noted down here, but kind of one is going back a little bit further. And we were just discussing, I guess first I'll touch on the kind of AI that we just discussed in terms of like being able to monitor more information. How do you see yourself differentiating? And are you using AI to do that? Are you like, what kind of workflows are you using currently to improve your practice and make sure that you're covering enough information?
So we're in the process of working with a highly recommended consultant from the IT area who's very familiar with AI, because I believe AI is a two-edged sword. AI technology has been the single most important factor in lifting people up economically around the world. It's also been the single most powerful force for creating unemployment in the world.
Yeah, each time. Yeah.
I mean, in other words, having a strong back isn't the way to make a living. Okay. So we have to use our minds. Well, AI is going beyond that. AI is going to, at least initially, unemploy significant numbers of people.
Yeah.
Now, how does that affect me? Well, it affects me in the following. I'm going to use it, not because I want to unemploy people, but because I want to be more efficient. And I'm going to use it specifically for some of the forensic reviews that I do. And I'm going to use it for the compliance consulting that I do, because it will be able to pull information out from me much more rapidly than other means will, depending on whether or not what type of AI we're using. I do not want to use AI that thinks on its own without my inputs.
Yeah.
Because I've seen too many, and I'm conservative about this, by the way. I'm in favor of AI, but I'm conservative about it because I've seen too many mistakes where, for example, lawyers have asked AI to provide cases for motions that they're filing in court, what you would call barristers, okay? And the AI made up a case on its own that never existed and so the attorney that comes out in court, the attorneys are getting fined and sanctioned by their bar associations. Some people are losing licenses.
Yeah.
It has a danger to it. It doesn't. It's kind of like Isaac Asimov's laws of robotics. First, do nothing that'll hurt somebody, a human being. So, yeah, I'm in favor of it, and it's going to help me with the forensic side of my practice and the compliance side of my practice. Right now, it is built into my research apps that I use, where I don't have to now dig through it to get to an answer. I simply ask it a question, and it comes up with an answer, and it gives me first a generalized answer, and then I can get below that to the specificity that I may or may not need for the question. But it does it almost instantly instead of me digging through things or my staff digging through things. So it's better for the client. It's better for us if it's used effectively.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. It's, all these conversations I ask about AI, and it is the general topic is that it's so good at pulling things together and giving you just basically the key points to then form your own opinion when you're in the loop. But it's like all verdicts already exist in your own mind. It's just that it needs to go through that filter to be effective. Otherwise it starts hallucinating and it can direction.
I don't know if that's exactly the case for me. I've been doing this for a long time, so I already have a certain amount of information in my balding head, okay? But so I use AI not only for finding out new information, but for supporting what I already know, but which may have changed. And so I needed to see what's changed. So the AI that we're going to use, will be capable of generating reports in my voice or our voice, which is what I call a vanilla voice. We don't take positions that are pejorative or qualitative. We take positions that are based on data. Okay, which is different. And then actually what we do is the data takes the position, we don't, and that's generally not refutable because I'm not making a value decision based upon my own emotional feelings about what I've seen.
So it's not biased.
I try to keep bias out of everything that I do. Is it possible? Is it impossible to do? AI is going to make it more possible to keep bias out if it's used that way.
How do you manage, keeping bias out of the equation completely while also trying to work in favor of, finding, I guess, when a certain corporation has broken the law?
So let's first of all, from the way I'm trained, okay, this is all the way I'm trained, having been in law enforcement. The mere fact that somebody says somebody broke the law doesn't mean a thing to me. I'm probably more sensitive to that statement in the case of violent crimes than I am to other crimes, simply because I don't want to see anybody hurt.
Yeah.
But in the case of economic crime, let's call it, because that's what it is, the way that we do things is and I'll give you an example that's really good. I hadn't worked for years in trying to prove that a crime had occurred as a result of an embezzlement. And I got a phone call from a very well-known and very, very, very good and very friendly, because I've been friends with him for years and done work with him for years, criminal defense lawyer who was brought into a matter at a local business, a big local business. And the allegation was that their most trusted employee stole $10 million from the business at the rate of about $1 million a year, let's say over 10 years.
Right. Yeah.
And so I was asked to put together the flow of funds, the real flow of funds, because he was also, this employee was using phantom accounts of phantom employees and so on and so forth, phantom expenses to get the money out.
What do you mean by phantom fake?
Yes, we call them phantom fake. So what we did is we were able to show that from the documents, where the money came from, which accounts it came from when it left, which accounts it went to, which were not the company's accounts, what she did with the money when she got hold of it, where it went to from there, and then we stopped because that was enough for us to make a report for the United States Attorney's Office in Miami, Florida, and she's now in prison. Now, I didn't do anything that said that she committed a crime. I never said she committed a crime. I just simply said money started from point A.
Yeah.
It went to point B, from point B to point C, from point C to point D, under her control. That's all I did. And as a result, the U.S. Attorney's Office made a finding that there was a crime, took it to an immediate grand jury. They indicted her immediately. It was amazing. And also provided what's called an information, which is a criminal complaint, so they could do what they needed to do while they were waiting for her indictment.
Okay.
And she never actually went to trial in the real sense of the word. She pled guilty in court when all the evidence was presented, and she's in jail serving time. And there's other factors in this which I can't go into, but that's a case that's been published. So where I'm going to is I did nothing that could be construed as taking a position as to her guilt or her innocence within the four corners of the report that was written.
Yeah, and I guess it's not your job as well. It's like, that's more kind of Saul Goodman's job. I don't know if you've watched like Better Call Saul. It's a Netflix program. It's a sequel to a prequel to Breaking Bad.
Well, because they're advocates. They're advocates. I can't be an advocate.
Exactly.
I mean, I'm telling you, well, and I say that especially where I'm going to be considered an expert and I'm going to testify. There is a place for people who do what I do can advocate behind the scenes in discussing things with attorneys and helping them to form their case. Because as one criminal defense lawyer once said to me, and interestingly enough was also mirrored by a commercial litigator, which really surprised me. I don't know anything about numbers. I'm not good with numbers. That's why I became a lawyer. That's what they both said to me. And I'm thinking to myself, well, So why are you involved in this Ponzi scheme case if you don't understand numbers for the criminal defense lawyer? And why are you involved in this corporate contractual dispute that involves money if you don't understand numbers?
Mm.
The reason is they want to make money. It's that simple. I mean, they have to make a living, but so then it falls on to people like me to help them get them through what they have to get through and help them to understand the numbers.
Absolutely. Yeah, completely.
So that's that side of the business, and it's that's one side, and that's just the forensic accounting side.
Yeah, completely. So I want to move on to trading capital for freedom. So
Yes.
yeah,
Amnesty
when
case. Yes.
yeah. So when international amnesty programs are introduced, asset holders pay massive penalties to avoid prison. What is the psychological breaking point where a client shifts from asset protection to buying back their freedom?
So it depends on what their marital status is, because we have a tendency we see from time to time that because if they have a spouse and children, money will, and it's an economic crime, money will be placed in the hands of family members.
Yeah.
And there is a thing called willful blindness. It's a term of art, and it says that they knew or should have known where the money was coming from, or that it wasn't coming from a normal source. So sometimes they will do it. They will accept paying large amounts of money because they don't want to drag their families into an issue. When they, it's interesting to me because I've only represented one person in my entire career who actually could not be convinced to give the information that the government wanted. This person was more given to serving a prison sentence than to ever talk about anything that was in part of that case that the government wanted him to do, which was for him to point the finger at other people. He says, I'm not going to do it. And went to jail. It's the only person I've seen personally that's done that.
Do you think that was because he was tied up and basically forced to, I don't know, blackmailed or threatened to, or?
No, I just think that was the way he was. He said, look, I did my crimes. I'm not pointing to anybody else's crimes.
Yeah.
You call this a crime? I admit I did this. If it's a crime, I'll take my punishment, but I won't implicate anybody else because I did what I did. We have something called the Racketeering Influence Corrupt Practices, RICO, Organizations Act. And what that is it used to be that, and this was, by the way, passed specifically to deal with organized crime. Now it's used for everything. But once it's in our Code of Federal Regulations, any prosecutor can use it for whatever they want if they think it fits. That's how it works. So they passed this because the leaders of criminal organizations, because of all of the buffering that was occurring, were not being implicated in crimes. But once the Racketeering Influence Corrupt Organizations Act was put into effect, it meant that if anybody in the organization did something, the head of the organization was automatically guilty. That's the simple way.
Right.
And so that's how they dismantled some of the power of the Italian or the American mafia, which wasn't, by the way, only Italian. It covered people from every background you can think of, and they all got sucked into that title, mafia.
Yeah, because it's crime via proxy, right? Yeah.
What?
It's crime via proxy of the people you work with.
Yeah. And so to answer your question, the first thing is money. Okay. So our amnesty programs were created by the IRS. Okay. The ones that I'm talking about. There are also other amnesty programs and anti-money laundering and so on, which are also important to mention because they're based on self-reporting. All Amnesty Act programs are based on self-reporting. So the IRS invented one, and they called it the voluntary disclosure program. It goes all the way back almost to the time of Enrico Caruso. Okay, that's how far back it goes. It's evolved over the years. And today, so in the 1990s, we had something called, I think it was the 90s, we had something called the Offshore Initiative, because we found out that one large credit card company's credit cards were being used to help people launder money. How is that happening? Well, they were going to their lawyers and they were saying, I want to put money in a place where the U.S. government won't know where it is, and I want to be able to spend it. They said, great, no problem. They called somebody that they knew in a tax haven or a banking haven jurisdiction, and They said, this is what my client wants to do. We all have some sort of until a criminal act occurs or whatever, we're going to rely on attorney-client privilege. Now, there's something that that some of them forgot about, which I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not really going to get into it, but it's not just the way that it sounds. I mean, it's called the crime fraud exception. So for lawyers. So they would give their lawyers money and would go into the lawyer's trust account. Then the lawyer would send it to a lawyer overseas, who would then take it to a local bank and open an account, and then get them a credit card from that local bank or in that jurisdiction so they could spend the money. And none of the records would come to the United States. And there was a federal case in Miami. I seem to live at the epicenter of some of this, that said that particular credit card issuer, that company, was going to have to turn over all of its records. And so this program was invented to bring these people in from the cold to get them compliant. That wasn't the most successful thing that ever happened. So about the same time as the scandal involving Union Bank of Switzerland occurred as a result of them enticing U.S. people to hide their money at their bank in Switzerland using the Art Basel show here in they would come here in Miami and talk to people of ultra high net worth and so on. They came up with the Offshore Voluntary Disclosure Program. That was the first major amnesty program that we can discuss. And in that program, as some of my staff like to say, and some of my colleagues would like to say, people were trading a yellow jumpsuit or an orange jumpsuit for their money.
Yeah.
And you paid really big fines. And as long as they weren't already under investigation they had to do 6 years of back reporting, amending, and as long as the government felt they were truthful in everything that they did, the government took their money, gave them what was called a closing agreement, and said, "Go and sin no more, my child. If you do, by the way, we're going to come and arrest you." Okay.
Yeah.
So that was what their agreement was. Well, that was great, and so then they came up with something a little better. It came up in terms of, because there was a lot of complaining to Congress, and Congress said the IRS basically we're not happy, and Congress gives the IRS their money to operate, and it went all the way to the top, and I mean the top, including the executive branch of our government. So there was pressure coming from all sides. So they invented something called the offshore streamlined procedures and the domestic offshore streamlined procedures. And that said very simply, if you did not know what you were doing, if you didn't have the knowledge to understand what you were doing by your training, by background, and you sought other advice, and the other advice was wrong from other professionals, and so on, as long as you correct all of this, you're going to pay no penalties. You're just going to pay us the tax you owe us plus interest, and you're done. But we will not give you a closing agreement. You're just done. And if we find it happens again, that's it. But you get no closing agreement. Okay. That was on one side. On the other side, which was purely domestic, meaning you don't live offshore, you live in the United States, and you don't spend enough days, which was 330 days a year in the foreign jurisdiction outside of the United States, then we're going to charge you a 5% miscellaneous penalty. Okay. But the same rules apply other than that. So that's our amnesties. Now, they've since merged the Offshore Voluntary Disclosure Program into what they call the manual, which is the IRS manual program. And it's made some changes and it's evolved a little bit. It automatically imposes some pretty strong penalties. But once again, if you're accepted and they think you're telling them the truth, you're trading your money for an orange jumpsuit.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what exists today. And we have some other things. The failure, they tightened up on the streamline so that unless you actually neglected to report unreported income, you cannot get into that program anymore. You have to use a different program, which requires a reasonable cause statement from an attorney. We still do the same background work, but there's a reason on documents, and forms. But the attorney will have to write a reasonable cause letter. I will not write them because I don't think that I can write a reasonable cause letter the same way as any good attorney can. They're differently.
Right.
So that's how our amnesties work. And we have amnesties for SEC. We have amnesties for AML. They're not really amnesties. It's basically the government takes a position that they're going to charge you less or not charge you at all if you fall on your sword.
Yeah.
You say something happened here, and because there are certain things that occur which are called strict liability offenses by the lawyers and by the code. And those strict liability offenses don't allow for any sort of modifying those penalties and so on. And by the way, the penalties are strictly in the hands of the regulators. They make the decisions. So we've got FinCEN. The two big ones right now are FinCEN and OFAC. SEC is a regulator. We have so many regulators. The IRS is a regulator. The U.S. Attorney is actually a regulator in a way. So, I mean, we have all of these regulators, and most of them run through the Treasury Department, but some don't. Some are through other departments, and like the Bureau of Industry Standards and so on. So, and then there's a lot of cooperation between them and their European counterparts, and that's the other way that they get to people.
Okay.
We use our treaties and our international agreements to create a long arm to get to information based on request.
Fantastic. Okay.
Sometimes automatic exchange of information, which occurs with IRS and so on.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay. So to go into kind of the geopolitical minefield, could you explain the reason global banks fail to anticipate the geopolitical shifts that turn a standard transaction corridor into an AML minefield?
Okay. So there's a case that just came out from the European Court. It was published today.
Okay.
Which basically said in the country of Slovenia, you cannot refuse to open a bank account for somebody. So
sorry, can you repeat that? You said where?
The banks in Slovenia now, according to this directive of the European Court, they have to have their policies and procedures, but they can't be too stringent. And it's really designed to allow anybody to have what they call a payments account or a bank account, a checking account that wants to have an account regardless of anything else. That you cannot use OFAC and sanctions lists to prevent them from having an account. Okay. So one of my colleagues sent this to me today, and he was all excited. But he only read the headline. I dug down into the act. This was before we spoke. It's just maybe a half an hour of speaking to you. And it came out yesterday on our side. So I read it, the detail of the actual decision by the court. And one of the things that struck me is Slovenia must really want to collect taxes. So if everybody's money is running through the banks, they know everything about everybody.
Yeah.
So if they make it easier to open an account, they have more information.
Okay. Yeah.
State of Florida passed a law that says you can't unreasonably, and whatever that unreasonable means, you can't really prevent people from having accounts in Florida in the same ways we did. So, but what the banks do is they create, but under this risk-based approach that we use here, which they also use in Europe, they take the position that they will set up the facts and circumstances of the requirements for allowing that account at their bank, which means that you're allowing us to share your information with anybody that asks for it or anytime we need it for whatever purpose, for law enforcement and so on. And then we'll open the account. It's never straightforward. It's always a spider web. So you asked me about the geopolitical minefield.
Yes.
Well, there's cultural blindness. Look, when we're dealing from the AML side, anti-money laundering side, with banks in Latin America and the Caribbean, they're trying to interpret U.S. regulations in an environment that is totally different than what we have in the United States and which culturally is alien to them. We speak Spanish, we speak English. The English they speak in the Caribbean is closer to the English you speak in some cases. They also have their own form of patois or other versions of their English, which is all things are sort of run together and cut off or whatever. And it's a local dialect. And then they have Spanish, and the Spanish is the same everywhere, but it's used differently in different countries. And they're looking at U.S. regulations, and they're trying to interpret what those regulations really mean without having the cultural mindset and educational mindset to really be able to reasonably and protectively interpret.
Yes.
So, and to take it a step further, here's where the minefield gets better. There is somewhat of a divergence that occurs between CRS, for example, in reporting, and the U.S. reporting on FATCA, but also the AML authorities don't necessarily view things in the same way. And that's a big problem. So we do things from the U.S. perspective. We try to keep up on what's going on with the Wolfsburg people and the Financial Action Task Force and all of that. We keep up with that. We have our own Bank Secrecy Act and our OFAC regulations. In fact, Bank Secrecy Act is managed by the Financial Crimes Information Center, which is FinCEN. And OFAC is OFAC. And OFAC is designed was there to keep our money supply or to keep, to impart the political will of the United States government. And so that's how that works. And so it is a minefield. It's a real minefield. Look, for example, we can't comment. Every country has its own AML regulations. They're not the same. They're not the same. Every country has its own sanctions regulations. If they have them at all, they're not the same.
Yep.
But we are trying to impose our will for purposes of our own money supply and for whatever political purposes we have by forcing everybody through the United States Bank Secrecy Act funnel and the OFAC funnel. But what happens and here's the minefield, this is part of it, by the way, I'm going to give you the second part in a minute. What happens when the regulations overseas diverge instead of converge? Secondly, regulators, and this is part of the minefield, are no longer just accepting, apparently, going forward, because that's what they've signaled. They're not going to just say, okay, you have policies and procedures, you check the box, you did, and that's it, and you're done on examination by regulators or by examiners who work for the regulator. They want to know the logic of how did you arrive at your decision? What was your logic? If there's a gap between the logic of your policies and procedures and what is actually happening, and you can't explain it, that's a failing. That can cause you to pay some severe fines. And I've seen one case of, I think it was a $6 billion fine years ago that was paid by a French bank. So it is what it is. And so if they're not, we're going to call it papering, if they're not maintaining their decision process and the support for that decision process, in their file system, in their computer systems, wherever they keep it, to support their decisions regarding money laundering, regarding sanctions, regarding the opening of accounts, the closing of accounts, and an examiner comes in from whatever jurisdiction it is, and they can't support it, what they've done. The examiner doesn't want to wait around for them to try to recreate their thinking. It could be a finding that could be very costly. And we see these things happening. And so and then there can be conflicts between the industry itself, the financial services industry, and what they want to do. What they want to do may be more conservative because they want to safeguard their institution than what the government is permitting to be done. And that's a conflict, and it's a minefield. So it causes them to bring in their attorneys. And because there's no convergence of opinion universally on what these regulations require, right? The legal advice that they get may in and of itself cause confusion. It is a minefield.
Absolutely.
I think you use the term minefield. It is a minefield. I'm going to give you a great example. I know of a case in a specific country, where a bank has 38,000 accounts open for customers. These accounts are cryptocurrency accounts in a bank. Okay.
Interesting.
They have no policies and procedures written for that cryptocurrency, meaning, what they're going to do if this happens, what they're supposed to do, how they're supposed to check out. Like, what's the source of the crypto? How did that person get the crypto? Who did they get it from? It's just simple things. And there's others that are more complicated. What are they using the crypto for?
Yeah.
And so on. So U.S. banks right now don't like crypto. They just don't. They think it's too difficult to maintain their regulatory requirements for keeping the money with the existence of crypto. Now, just so we're clear, crypto is not crypto. It is not something that is impenetrable. They have an algorithm. It's mathematics. It can be broken.
Yeah, especially with quantum computing and AI.
Especially with AI now. Quantum computing, we're not there yet. That's a whole other discussion. But they're pseudo-anonymous. They're pseudo-anonymous, and I know for a fact, because I've been told, and I've seen it happen, that our regulators and certain agencies now know how to trace crypto. Now, we've just come out with this Genius Act, which is encouraging the banks to open crypto, but all this time they've had all these policies and procedures to not have crypto. Now they're being told to loosen up. Well, I don't know whether they're going to loosen up. It's a minefield. And then I don't know what the attitude is. The European Union is not a monolithic entity. Every country has its own has its own ideas and its own feelings about these things, like crypto.
Mm.
So it's a minefield because there is no convergence of thought.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so what is the primary indicator that tells a forensic investigator an executive has crossed the line from aggressive business growth to a white-collar crime?
Wow. So that's really interesting. So when we do work, there's something called a net worth test, or a test of, there's a certain test of transactions. And I'll give you an example using corruption as an example. Bribery to get business. Okay. Not going to use the UK Bribery Act. I'm not qualified to even talk about it, but I do know from what I've read that it's more draconian than our anti-corruption regulations.
Yeah.
We have two. So how do we do this? So we look at the person's, this is a great way to do it. Take a look at the lifestyle of the person. Okay. Of the president of the company, of the senior executives, of the board of directors, whoever you want to look at over a period of time. So you create a style of living approach, right?
Mm.
And if all of a sudden, for no apparent reason, that person's income from the company explodes, but there is no valid or income surrounding the company, or style of living changes dramatically, and there's no way of knowing where that money came from, there's an issue going on. So where could it could have come from an inheritance, right?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No problem there. No, I interrupted. I was just wondering, like, how do you get access to the lifestyle information, though? Would it be through transactions?
It's everywhere. Just look at, are they building a new addition to their house? They've got a 3,000 square foot house. It's all of a sudden going to become 5,000 or 6,000 square feet, which is like 600 square meters.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They've gone from driving here's a great example. They're already wealthy. They're driving a Mercedes S580.
Mm.
Okay. They paid for it cash. So they paid in U.S. currency about $130,000 for it. And all of a sudden they bought a brand new Bentley for cash. So that's at least $100,000 more. And while they did that, they took a trip, one of the high-end cruise ships, such as Regents or one of the others, Silver Seas, all of them. They're all out there. And on a world trip, right? A world cruise, 6 months on the ocean. They never had the money before.
They couldn't even drive the Bentley.
I mean, that's right. They couldn't drive the Bentley, which, by the way, is a wonderful vehicle. I'd love to have one. They're phenomenal cars.
Absolutely, yeah.
Unfortunately, they're no longer made in Great Britain, but that's
I was about to say, yeah, unfortunately, exactly. What was it, like an Indian company that bought the brand?
No, I don't think so. I think, well, no, let's see. Rolls-Royce, I think, is owned by BMW now, and somebody else owns Bentley. I don't know who it is, but I don't think it's an Indian company. Both cars are, by the way, it's just as a compliment to news, because I know it's a British product and history and so on.
Absolutely,
you should be proud of it.
Yeah.
They're really making beautiful looking cars now. For years, I thought they were not so good looking, but they're beautiful.
Elegant, right? Yeah.
They are just gorgeous to look at, and they are very safe. They weigh 8, 9, 10,000 pounds. So anything you hit's going to be crushed, and you won't be. So, I mean, but anyway, so you look at their lifestyle. You just look at the lifestyle. Here, we had a guy who was charged with murder. I was doing a murder case. I had to look at his lifestyle, second-degree murder case. It involved organized crime also, but he was an FBI agent. He was an FBI agent.
Okay.
He was a government agent. He was charged with corruption. Well, we did 6 years before the alleged crime and 4 or 5 years after the alleged crime. There was no change in his style of living. I couldn't find one penny of anything. But he was sort of involved with the gangsters, but not because of what they was charged with, or not because of the charged crimes. In fact, he was found innocent or not guilty of the corruption charge itself. And that was because the numbers spoke for themselves. So we looked at every piece of his style of living, which included his wife's income, which included where he lived, which included the cars that he had, which included vacations he took, the type of insurance policies he had. Did he have any large single premium life insurance policies on his salary? Would his salary make it possible for him to pay, let's say, $5,000 a month for life insurance, or a whole life policy, which never ends unless you stop paying? or you get to the point where it pays for itself. So it's kind of how it's done. And the same thing applies to corporations. Let's assume that a bribe was paid to a foreign government to get business in a foreign country, right? That's the charge. That's the crime that's being charged. Well, the guy on the other side isn't going to say that you paid him a bribe. They're going to use cutouts or straw people to do that, okay?
Yeah.
So then you have to look back at the company and say, what happened? The income jumped from $1 million a year of revenue to $10 million a year of revenue. This company wasn't particularly well known in the industry. It was brand new or relatively new. There's all kinds of things, but essentially you're following the trail of the money from inside the company to outside. I mean, and it's not necessarily a public company, but if it is, then you still look at what the senior executives are earning
Good.
in their life.
That's the way. Yeah. So, okay, to go into global compliance, culturalism, why do regional cultural attitudes towards authority alter the execution of a compliance framework for a bank operating across different international jurisdictions?
So we touched on it just a moment ago, but we'll go a little more in depth. We do certain types of work for banks, about 300 banks outside the U.S. That work is dictated by the rules from OFAC, FinCEN, and the IRS right now, and also the SEC in some cases, and the Bureau of Industrial Statistics and all that. So when we go in there, we have to look at what their programs and procedures are when we do, let's say, a risk examination. That is, a risk analysis or examination. It's more of a review than an examination in depth, but we have to go through documents. So what happens is we look to see how they are doing what they are doing on a daily basis. They almost always have policies and procedures that they believe are compliant with what has to be done vis-a-vis the U.S., right? And they're correspondent banks. This is only happening because of correspondent banking, okay? So the U.S., the two things happen. One is what the government wants. The other thing is what the correspondent bank wants in the U.S. to allow them to have bank account at their bank for them to act, for it to act as a funnel for money moving from the U.S. to their country or from their country to the U.S. for making payments and other things. So we have to know, we have to get a feel, and we have to know how they're doing these things. We have to do a gap analysis. And so what happens is when you talk about global compliance, it is all cultural. Because if I were in a certain country which had a different culture, a completely different culture of how people respond and act, and if I was living in that country, I might be able to walk into a local bank office and say to the employee with whom I want to open an account, listen, I'm both a U.S. citizen and a citizen of this country. I became a U.S. citizen later. Okay? And I know that you're now supposed to report on my account to the U.S. government, providing I meet certain parameters. But your grandfather and my grandfather went to school together, and our parents went to school together. And I would appreciate it if you not inform that I am a U.S. citizen to your bank. I want to use only my local passport to open this account. It's cultural, purely cultural. This person may or may not say yes and agree, but the point is it gets breached. That's cultural. It was more common years ago than it is now. It's the the financial institutions and the financial services industry outside of the U.S. with respect to U.S. requirements are become much more compliant. The other thing that happens is because of the Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2020 in the United States, which increased the reach of the Department of Justice, they can now reach through these. The banks can look through, and the Department of Justice can look through these funnels, these corresponding accounts, to get information on other on depositors, not in the U.S., but in that other country that they're investigating, who might have committed crimes or offenses against the United States.
Okay.
And this is I've seen this happen in real life. There are our examiners, our regulators, our government agents are very smart about this, very smart. They know exactly what they're doing when they do it, because under the Financial Action Task Force rules, for the 40 recommendations, for example, tax evasion is a specified money laundering offense under those rules.
Okay.
Well, so if they want to investigate money laundering, they can use tax evasion involving a dual citizen, for example, or a resident of the United States, or somebody who fits into the substantial presence test, which makes them a U.S. taxpayer for 1 year. Okay, they can use that to get to that information by going to the local authority in that country and saying, "I'm investigating this person for money laundering. I want everything about them economically."
Yeah, so it gives them a foot in the door.
And they will get a request, and they will honor that request.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
and by the way, law enforcement throughout the world, for the most part, I mean, they're trying to converge. They're trying to do this. Now, there are countries which are not cooperative, obviously, but I'm seeing more and more convergence of law enforcement, and that's a big issue. And then, of course, there's the gap. Now, that cultural compliance failing with respect to these regulations and these procedures creates a gap. Those gaps are cause for being fined by their own government, maybe being arrested in their own country. So that's what we're talking about here. That's your cultural compliance issue.
Yeah.
It is definitely, it's complicated. It's very complicated. And we all live in a little bubble. You live in your bubble. I live in my bubble. Okay.
Yeah. So it's very
You have your own issues, we have our issues. But by the way, our issues revolve around some of the same banking havens and so on. So
yeah.
our joint issues.
Yeah.
Anyway, what's your next question?
Fantastic. So I want to go into kind of more future looking things, and then we'll wrap up. We'll brush past these a little bit faster because I know we're over an hour now. So
it's okay.
So as decentralized finance,
you own me for now.
Amazing. Yeah. What's the primary kind of leak that financial institutions are failing to secure as decentralized finance and automated cross-border banking scales?
So this is really more fun than this one is more fun. Yeah. During the previous administration of this country, there was a move on for the U.S. to produce its own digital currency.
Yes.
Had that been done, the entire crypto industry would have collapsed, in my opinion.
Okay.
Because crypto, by its very nature, outside of the distributed ledger, which is a wonderful thing, and some of the security issues, right, in terms of information, would no longer they would have ceased to exist, because now the country is producing its own digital currency, and because crypto traditionally, outside of those two things, has no intrinsic value. It's kind of always reminded me, and I'm not saying it to be negative about crypto. I think there's uses. But what I'm getting to is that when it first started, I looked at it like the Netherlands tulip scandal of like the 16th or 17th century, where people were investing in tulips, which had no intrinsic value because they died after a week after they were picked.
Yeah.
It was crazy. So it's the same human nature. They were looking for a fast income stream, fast profit. So in this case, we're seeing the United States government under this administration being more receptive to crypto in banks. That's this. Once again, we're dealing with a double-edged sword. If you leave crypto in the crypto exchanges and the banks aren't involved with moving the fiat currency, right? So then there's still a certain pseudo-anonymity by the way, we started to solve that problem also. We're requiring the crypto exchanges to report the same way as brokerage houses do for securities. And this was the first year that happened. And they're going to make it more and more fulsome. So now, by making the banks, by telling the banks they can be more receptive, and loosening the strings, so to speak, it allows for freer trading and other things. So there was just FinCEN just produced, as came out this morning. They want policies and procedures set up at the banks for handling all of this to protect the money supply again. So they're already on top of it. I don't see it becoming what people would like it to be, so some people would like it to be.
Yeah.
I see it's much better use in the distributed ledgers and other things because they're indelible. They can't be erased. And they're not all in one place, so they're harder to destroy. And they're all electronic. The gambling side of it, I don't see I'm not in favor of. Okay, I'm just not. It is. It's a very much of a corrupted casino, in my opinion, because certain large traders move it up and down. Bitcoin is the best example of all, but there's Ethereum. They move them up and down, and then there's the smaller ones. But they have no intrinsic value of their own. They're not widely accepted as currency. The country of El Salvador, Bitcoin is considered a fiat currency there, but they don't know what to do with it. Now they have 300 to 350 people going back to El Salvador from the United States, like every week or every other week. And they don't have bank accounts. They're going to work with cryptocurrency. What are they going to do with it? Because businesses that accept it automatically have to convert it to fiat currency. What's the fiat currency in El Salvador? The U.S. dollar. It's a dollar economy. So it just doesn't. It's really kind of a wink by government officials, nod, a wink, open opportunity for corruption. That's my opinion of it.
Yeah. I mean, for sure. But then at the same time, I guess there's no intrinsic value. It's not backed by anything. But then I suppose like with fiat currency, it's also, what was it, 1970 or something, that it was removed from being interlinked with gold as well. And so like, I think.
Remember Richard Nixon?
Yeah.
So the answer though is it's backed by the full faith and credit of the government now. What does that mean? That's why we see it moving up and down in international trading, currency trading, right? In different countries, like when I want to go to a certain country, I have to see what the exchange rate is, and do I want to live with that exchange rate? Do I not want to live with that exchange rate? There are currency trading offices all over the place that in every country, and they buy and sell currency, and they make a profit. So but that's the inherent value, because it's backed by the full faith and credit of a country, which is different than what you're discussing or what you asked me about, where it's just on its own.
Mm-hmm. But in a scarce supply, in a limited supply, I suppose that's like the value.
Look, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The reason it doesn't matter is because you can cut it into fraction. You can fractionalize it to make it expand. But at the end of the day, what are you going to spend it for? You still have to convert it to fiat currency. Some years ago when Twitter was Twitter before it became X, I used to comment on cryptocurrency there because I was familiar with the U.S. system of taxation with respect to crypto. And somebody posts, "This is my new Ferrari." This is a true story. "This is my new Ferrari." It's a picture right there, Twitter. And it started this way: "I am a Bitcoin millionaire.
Okay.
This is my new Ferrari. And by next year, I'm going to be a Bitcoin billionaire." So I'm there, part of the group. I post and I said, "You sound like you're a U.S. citizen based on the way that you're using language. So if you are, I want you to know that the purchase of that Ferrari with your Bitcoin was a taxable event, was a reportable event. It could generate income tax."
Yeah.
And this guy writes back, and he was a guy. He said he was a man. He says, because he had a picture of himself pointing to his Ferrari. I'm assuming he was a man, but he couldn't have been more than about 20 or 22 years old, whatever he was. Yeah. He says, "Well, I live in Dubai, so I don't have to worry about that." And I said, "But Dubai is part of the United Arab Emirates. We have a tax treaty and an anti-evasion treaty and we have a FATCA agreement with the UAE. So yes, they do report." I said, "and the IRS has something called data track, which they use to scrape the internet and social media for things like you just said to me.
Right.
And you just told them where you live." And I never heard from him again.
Right.
He never posted again. And what happens if his Bitcoin turns into garbage? It's jumped up and down and up and down. Every time one of the whales, as they call them, decides they want to make a profit, they dump it. And then they buy it back.
Yeah.
And there's some very wealthy people doing that. And it's just not, I don't have any use for it.
Yeah, no, 100%. It is definitely controlled by the top players in it. And also, of course, on the gambling front, like you mentioned, it's like it's a business, but it's an exploitative business. You get into that and you're the only one that wins in the market. It's the creators of the meme coins,
Well, we've always had that with stock markets, okay, with securities markets. We used to have something called specialists. Now everything is with, it's program trading. But when the specialists existed, they had a seat in the New York Stock Exchange. And they control a portfolio of certain stocks. They control them. They control them going up. They control them going down. I used to say it's a fixed casino. It's a corrupt casino.
Yeah.
I still think it is. The only thing you can do now is hook on to a great index or something else, and whatever, and ride that up and down, and hopefully it'll keep going up. And the only thing that seems to make it keep going up is the population keeps increasing. More people invest. There's more demand. It is supply and demand.
Mm, mm. Yeah. Yeah. And isn't insider trading illegal?
Yes, it's illegal, and
So,
so if you're a member of the U.S. Congress, I guess I don't know if we always have these scandals appearing in the newspapers. Yes, it's illegal. It's
mm,
illegal, and I'm sure it still continues on. What difference is it if it's not enforced or selectively enforced in such small numbers of people that it
yeah.
doesn't matter? What difference does it make if it's illegal in the
Mm,
sense of enforcement?
yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's the problem, I guess. So, okay, a couple more questions.
Go
Just
ahead.
quick. So, what change needs to occur in how in international law firms integrate forensic accounting teams during the early hours of a corporate fraud investigation?
Well, you answered your own question. The earlier, the better.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would say even before the cause of action is filed in the courts, because you have to know what you're filing your cause of action about. Now,
Mm,
the problem with that is you'll only have records from one side, the side of your client. You won't get the records from the other side until you, in the United States at least, until you file for your cause of action
yeah.
and do a request for documents, subpoena.
Mm,
So, but the earlier the better. I mean, otherwise, it becomes it's a rush. You can miss things. You can't view things as calmly as you'd like to. And this is where AI can be really helpful,
yeah.
especially in what we call big box litigation, which is hundreds of thousands of pieces of paper.
Mm,
And it can get
mm,
really intense because it's not just the bank accounts and the canceled checks or the electronic payments, both incoming and outgoing. It's also the documents that are related to those payments or receipts of income of money. What do they actually say? So it's not just checks and deposits. It's also other documents, invoices, contracts,
mm. Yeah.
or purchase
Absolutely.
orders.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so,
Yeah. So the earlier the better. Yeah. And last question, if you were advising a managing director of a bank who is going through intense regulatory scrutiny, what is the single non-negotiable rule of data retention that they must implement to protect their character?
well, their data retention is subject to regulation. So whatever the regulation says, that's what they're supposed to do.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, if you're talking about systems protection, meaning IT protection in today's world, but years ago it was different. They took bankers' boxes or boxes, stuck documents in them, and put them somewhere. We used to have a cave in Virginia when we had microfiche, where all of the bank statements of people on this plastic, this cellulose microfiche were kept in these caves, kept very cool. Tried to climate control it. Millions of documents.
Mm,
In fact, they probably were running out. At some point, started to run out of room. But we don't have that anymore, right? Because after the 9/11 attacks in the United States, the banking system changed and the records retention requirements changed. So, which got the banks off the hook. So, the faster, the better. So, what's the single most important thing? Have really enterprise level protection, intrusion protection on your system. Make sure that your internal control system, who has access to what, is carefully monitored.
mm,
Make sure that there are no internal conflicts of interest within your bank that would allow for something to happen that should not ordinarily happen, should not be permitted to happen, meaning from people from different areas of the bank with different areas of responsibility should not be able to affect the quality of the work done in other parts of the bank.
mm,
If you're the CEO or you're the chairman of the board, it's really important. It's a tone from the top. Everything comes from the top. That means that the compliance teams, the security teams must be supported, and there must be a budget commensurate with the needs of those teams to support and protect your institution.
mm.
And then there's ongoing training. So it's not just one single thing. The rules change daily. It's fluid. So there just has to be ongoing training from the board level down through every single part of the bank that could be affected by this. A very great example is onboarding of clients. The public-facing people. What do they need to do? How do they have to be trained? What do tellers have to be trained to do to accept money?
Mm,
Okay. How do you write a suspicious activity report? Make sure that they make sense. There has been a problem in certain places where suspicious activity reports were written in such a way as to make them non-reactionary. As you wrote it, but you wrote it in a way that disarmed it.
Right. Yeah.
I saw something, but it may not have been as what I think it is, but I'm reporting what I saw. But I'm not so sure that it's really what I saw. So that sort of training can't be allowed to occur. And FinCEN has spent a lot of time and effort trying to get people to write accurate and concise suspicious activity reports.
Mm.
Don't violate the currency transaction laws. Don't. In this country, there are different trigger points from which reports or suspicious activity reports are required to be filed. Don't allow information to come out from your bank that's prohibited under the regulations with respect to suspicious activity reporting. That could get you in a lot of trouble as a banker.
Mm.
Now, we now have new rules since the AML Act, Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2020, that allows for some exchange of this information. And there's also, recently FinCEN came out with something that allows a little looser exchange between financial institutions of otherwise unavailable information. So, but yeah, the thing is, I would say to any bank president, just do everything you can to make sure your institution's following the rules, because ultimately fines can dismantle your organization.
Absolutely.
And the same thing, by the way, applies to brokerage houses, not just banks.
Mm-hmm.
Brokerage houses have another set of problems. They can be debarred from participating in certain transactions. So tone from the top, always from the top, always. And robust policies and procedures and compliance groups. Really important. I happen to be a big fan of continuing education. So I think it should be continuous. Look, turnover in the financial services industry is large. I'm talking about employee turnover. So whoever comes into your organization may have been in another organization in a similar position, but their procedures may have been different than the procedures in your organization. And if they fail to take all of that into account, then they make a mistake, there may be a gap. That gap can cause fines and further examination.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's complicated.
But definitely like becoming
It is a
prepared.
minefield. I love your what you said about the minefield. I thought that was great. George, I thought that was great. It is a minefield.
Yeah, absolutely. And so interconnected, so delicate. Kind of like the further you get into it, the more control you need to have. Yeah.
Yeah, but don't forget you're dealing with people.
Yeah. Not control. I mean control over what you're doing. The further into it you get, you need to watch, be careful, and
we need to monitor our own personal behavior as much as possible.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think that's a great statement you just made. I like that. It's we are ultimately responsible for ourselves, right? So monitoring our own behavior is really a crucial thing.
Yeah. It's been great having you, Stanley. I appreciate you jumping on.
Okay. Well, I appreciate being with you.
To everybody who's watching, thank you for joining the Lead NLE.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. And I hope to see you in England.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll catch you on the next one.